Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 211. I'm Enigmius and today it's all about the thrusters. It's time. It's about damn time that we actually got this ship moving. We need a lot of thrusters. It's a big ship and I have no idea exactly how many thrusters we're going to need. I just know that we have to be able to maneuver in certain different directions, and we're just going to kind of approach it from that point of view. We'll get it moving in one direction and then another and another and another. You'll notice as the video progresses that the orientation of the ship will change, and sometimes it might be a little bit confusing transitioning from one position to the other, just because in between modifications to the hull to accommodate the thrusters and the placement of those thrusters that you'll see, I was kind of goofing around with the ship and not necessarily doing anything that would be worth watching. You know, twisting it around, seeing if I could move, and if so, how far and how fast and all that other stuff. So you'll have an opportunity to see the ship moving around a little bit towards the end of the video, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of thrusters to place and a lot of room to place them. That's, I guess, one of the benefits of having an extremely large ship, is that you can place a lot of things on the ship and not have to worry too much about whether or not you're going to have room. Now, the downside from sort of a design standpoint is that ships in the Star Trek universe don't necessarily have a lot of thrusters on them. They have maneuvering thrusters that you will see on extremely rare occasion, but in terms of how they move around in space and all of the different things that they do, there aren't really thrusters involved. So in order to place them in a way that makes sense, doesn't stand out in the wrong ways, and actually works, requires a little bit of thought. It's not like it's this massive challenge that I had to sit down and diagram and do all kinds of crazy stuff. It was just a matter of looking at the space available to me and deciding how I might best use that space in order to accomplish what I was trying to do without feeling like I was sacrificing all of that appearance work that we've been doing on the ship up to this point, for lack of a better way to describe it. So you can see we've got the first set of thrusters going into the back of the nacelles. These would be the main propulsion thrusters, or some of the main propulsion thrusters. They're the extra large capital vessel thrusters. They're 6 blocks by 3 by 3, which is extra large. They're quite large and not necessarily the easiest things to find a home for, but with a little bit of goofing around and kind of getting an eye on how the thruster is going to appear from the outside of the ship, we can get a pretty good idea of where to place them. And in this case, we put the thrusters in the back of the nacelles, but I wasn't satisfied that that would necessarily be enough to do what we need them to do, which is, first of all, getting us up to any kind of speed at all, but also doing it at a rate that's marginally responsive. You don't necessarily want to feel like every step in the process is a chore, waiting for the ship to get up to speed on all of these different things. So we had the thrusters placed, and then I also wanted to, at this point, kind of build around them a little bit on the interior. The placement of the thrusters isn't optimal in the sense of defending them from one another if they're taking damage and they start to explode, but I'm not really too concerned about that. At the same time, when it comes to the interior, it just made sense to me for a lot of the thrusters, maybe not necessarily all that you'll see in this video, but a lot of them, to build around them so that they're protected and we have access to obviously remove them, move them, do whatever we want to do. But once they're in place, walls. That's all it is building walls around them. One of the things that I discovered with this process is that I saved a lot of space that I would have to have done a lot of finishing in by putting in the thrusters now. There's a lot of things that I have in mind, some a little on the large side, some not, that I want to do before we declare this a finished build and ship the blueprint, so to speak. But getting the thrusters in now and kind of building around them has really been probably a good choice in terms of timing in this process, because one of the worst things that I could have done is do a bunch of cosmetic touch-ups and then realize that a lot of the ones that I did were right in the way of where I ended up wanting to place the thrusters. So the extra large thrusters are taking up a lot of space, and the space that we're taking up is space that we don't have to worry about finishing or passing off to the end user to finish, when we're talking about the people who are getting the blueprint and finishing off the ship to suit their personal interests and tastes. So we've got the forward propulsion thrusters taken care of, and now I wanted to do at least a few reverse thrusters. And one of the things about this particular part of the ship is these are the front of the nacelles. The actual Discovery has like a big red, almost like bulb on the front of the nacelles, and then just below that and to either side of that red bulb is a couple of sort of like blue bulb things sticking out the front, which plays very nicely into this whole idea of thrusters with blue plumes being put in those positions. It saves me having to worry too much about exactly what I'm going to do with that particular spot. So this is one of the only places really where we have an opportunity to put thrusters that actually makes quite a bit of sense. Obviously the real Discovery doesn't have thrusters there. They don't show an expanding plume when the ship is maneuvering, but it's still a blue thing that glows on the front of the nacelles in the position of other blue things that glow on the actual ship design. So this was one of the easier decisions in this whole process of placing reverse thrusters where they would make sense. But for reverse thrusters, not enough, not by any stretch of the imagination. Now, realistically speaking, the purpose of the reverse thrusters is more as a braking thruster. You're moving in a certain direction and you want to not be moving in that direction anymore. You need some sort of counter thrust to make the ship stop. I don't expect that we're ever going to need to parallel park a ship of this size. It's not a bad idea to have reverse thrust, no matter what you're expecting it to be used for. But realistically, when we're trying to gauge how many thrusters we need, it helps to understand how they're going to be used the majority of the time, and the majority of the time will be used as braking thrusters for these reverse thrusters. So having just 4 of them between the front of the 2 nacelles, not really going to cut it. So we're cutting open some holes here in the very front so that we can place some more of the reverse thrusters. And in this case, I decided, being that it's on the front of the ship, and the front of the ship is one of those areas where I spent quite a bit of time, particularly working on the deflector dish, and the front is part of the main hull section, which is my design. It's not taken from any of the ships that we reference when we're talking about the design as a whole. So I wanted to have a little bit more refinement, and you can see we're adding just a little bit of a bevel to the opening that we're cutting, so that when we place the thrusters inside and you look at them from the front, especially once they've got all of the walls around them and behind, it'll look a little bit more finished than we've got elsewhere on the ship. I don't necessarily mind having them, the openings elsewhere on the ship, a little bit more abrupt, but this was just one of those cases where we had an opportunity to step it up a little bit, so I decided to take that opportunity. It didn't take long, it didn't take much, it wasn't a difficult design sort of feature to come up with, but having done it, I'm pretty happy with the results. It gave us an opportunity to keep things on the front end moving closer to an elegant sort of appearance, where there are certain areas, if I had more time, I would rework the front end, because otherwise it's kind of crude in certain spots, I've found. And I'm just saying that not to be conversationally critical, but looking at the design and some of the areas that work is fun, but also looking at some of the areas that don't work, even if we're not planning on fixing them, is also useful, I think, because the next designs will be informed as much by the things that didn't work in this one as the things that did. And one of the things that didn't necessarily work for me as well as I might have liked was the front end, in particular. The top edge of the front end was a little bit just doesn't fit with the rest of the ship. Lateral thrusters, I And again, this is one of those situations where I had a lot of different places where I could have put them. There was a time where I thought I would probably end up just putting them in the sides of the nacelles. But I think there's also cosmetic benefits to having something going on the side of the saucer section, which realistically speaking, aside from the geometry itself, these two great big concentric rings, there's not a whole lot going on. It's voxel. It's very voxel. And if we have these little plumes sticking out at the sides when the ship is maneuvering, it distracts you from all of the voxel type limitations that we've got, especially on the top and the bottom. Trying to have sort of a soft curve towards the edge doesn't necessarily always translate as well as we might like it to. So the last thing that I wanted to do was partially in the spirit of making the ship more functional, but also trying to think of a way that we could get maybe enough thrusters onto this guy that you could bring it into planetary atmosphere and have extremely reduced maneuverability, but maneuverability nonetheless, and the ability to stay above ground. I don't know if we're going to hit that goal. It's not a critical goal for me, but I started thinking about what we would need for up and down movement, basically, for lack of a better term. We need it in space, even though there's no gravity because we move up and down. But when I started looking around the ship and trying to decide where I might like to put these great big gigantic thrusters to allow us to do that, all of a sudden I had this idea that said we don't have to use the great big gigantic thrusters for everything. And in fact, if I use the smallest thrusters available for a capital vessel, I'm going to lose some efficiency in terms of the fuel consumed to produce a certain amount of thrust, and I'm going to lose some efficiency in terms of space, which, as I mentioned, is really a non-issue here. We have tons of space that we can waste. It's not something that I'm concerned about. But aesthetically, we end up, if I'm careful, by creating all of these little holes in the top of the saucer section and replacing them with a thruster. Each of the holes becomes a thruster. We get this blue ring extending all the way around the top of the saucer section, and then we'll end up duplicating that on the underside for the lift thrusters. It's the win-win, killing two birds with one stone. We're adding more visual interest to the saucer section while doing something that creates a functional element. Whether or not this by itself is enough to hold this ship aloft in any gravity whatsoever is yet to be seen. I kind of think it wouldn't be enough. I also kind of think that I'm almost morally obligated at some point before or very shortly after I release the blueprint to test it and just fly it into Omicron's atmosphere and see whether or not we can keep it above the mountains, so to speak. So again, one of the things that I started doing actually when I was getting ready to do this is I was starting to refigure where the center of the saucer section was, and then counting out and getting an idea of what size circles I would need to sort of temporarily scribe on the saucer section in order to figure out where I wanted to put the thrusters. And then I realized I've already got all these circles there that I could use to mark it all out. So that's what I did. I just basically used those as the guide, the existing marks, the existing circles that were already part of the design. And now we've got close to 500 of these wee little thrusters between the top and the bottom. Actually, it's just a little over 500 for the lift and descent thrusters. It's kind of a neat looking ship, even with the front end that I'm not wholly satisfied with. So the next episode is going to be little details all over the place, tweaks and adjustments and things that I wanted to finish off. Getting very close to having this done, and I'm very excited to be having this done. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.